Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of The Crazy World We Die In. Today I'm going to be talking about the actor Tony Todd, who has recently passed away. Guys, if this is the first time you've been on my channel, welcome, and if you've been here before, welcome back. So when it comes to horror movies, there's certain characters who straight away stand out as being iconic, instantly recognizable, very popular. I'm going to list some names to you. So you have people like Freddy Krueger. You have people like Jason Voorhees. You have people like Michael Myers. Other people I could name are people such as Pinhead, Chucky, Ghostface, Leatherface. But the character that I'm going to be talking about the most today is Candyman. Candyman, iconic horror villain from the Candyman films. And Candyman was played by Tony Todd, who is sadly no longer with us. So I will talk about the Candyman film shortly, but I'm just going to talk about Tony Todd. So Tony Todd, instantly recognizable, standing at 6'5", he had a very distinctive voice. And a bit later in this video, I will make reference to Tony Todd, which I'm sure some of you gamers will recognize. So I'm going to talk firstly about Tony Todd's career. So Tony Todd, he is known for films, he's known for TV, and also known at the stage. I will be concentrating more on his film career as well as his TV career. So if we go all the way back to 1986, Platoon. Now, I don't know if you're a fan of war movies. I quite like them, but there have been some outstanding war movies over the years. Platoon, Apocalypse Now, and even later ones. Again, it's all subjective, but for me, for example, I really like Black Hawk Down. I know some people didn't like it, but there's been some really good films. So I'll make reference to Platoon because that was one of the first roles that Tony Todd took. I believe it was his second role, and he played Sergeant Warren in Platoon. He had a steady career in terms of film, and he starred in a number of films after Platoon. So he was in Lean On Me. He was also in Night of the Living Dead. But then he got his big break in 1992 with the film Candyman. Okay, so what do we know about Candyman? Well, one of the first things I found out, it was something I didn't know, was that Candyman was based on a short story. And that short story was actually based in Liverpool in England. Subsequently, if you watch the film, you know that the film doesn't take place in Liverpool. It doesn't even take place in England. It takes place in the US. Another thing which I found really interesting is when it comes to casting choices. Now, hindsight's a wonderful thing. And I think when somebody performs a role in a film, you generally can't see anybody else playing that role. If you look back in film history, there's always been films where you learn that somebody else would have got the part. Somebody else was the first choice, but they never took it for various reasons. Straight away, for example, Pulp Fiction is one of the films that pops into my mind. So we think of Pulp Fiction and straight away we think of Samuel L. Jackson, iconic role, Jules. You can't think of anybody else, can you? And going back to what I just said, he wasn't the first choice. The first choice to play Jules was Lawrence Fishburne. Now, I like Lawrence Fishburne, but when I think of Jules, the character from Pulp Fiction, I can't see anybody else playing it because that is Samuel L. Jackson's role. That is Samuel L. Jackson. And I think for Candyman, now that we've seen Candyman, we know Candyman, we can't think of anybody else playing that role. So which goes back to the point I was going to make. The person that they first wanted to play Candyman was Eddie Murphy. I don't think that works. I don't know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. But to me, Tony Todd was the much better choice. Don't get me wrong. Eddie Murphy is not a small man. I don't think he's probably got the voice for it. He did play a horror villain, didn't he? He played a vampire in Brooklyn. So he has played that genre. But for me, Eddie Murphy, it wouldn't have worked. But let me know what you guys think. Sticking on Candyman, and another thing I've learned is that considering that it was made in 1992, technology is nowhere near like what we've got here. And I would have thought if Candyman was remade, I know it was remade a couple of years ago, but like with the bees, a lot of the bees would be CGI generated, or they'll use technology to get that effect. Well, with the original Candyman, they actually used 200,000 honeybees. And when I say honeybees, I'm talking real honeybees. So they use real honeybees in the film. Now, Tony Todd, one of the things that he negotiated in his contract, considering that he was going to have so much close proximity to these honeybees, was that for every sting he received, he would get $1,000. Done my research just to see out of curiosity how much times he was stung, and what I've seen is between 23 and 26. So he got, at a minimum, he got $23,000 in total for the bee stings that he received in the film. Now, I'm sure you all remember this scene. And the reason I bring this up is that Tony Todd really had to have honeybees in his mouth. He had a protective gadget to stop any bees from going down his throat, and it took around half an hour for all the bees to be placed in his mouth. That's dedication, 100%, and you got to give him credit for that. And I think probably because it was his big break as well, and maybe he covers this in an interview, but to me, Tony Todd certainly went the extra mile for his role as Candyman, and I think that's what made it so iconic. I mean, how many actors out there would be willing to stuff honeybees in their mouth, be willing to be stung? You know, there's people out there, adults, who don't even like bees and wasps, you know, that would run out of room if a wasp is flying around. So Tony Todd has decided to go the extra mile and have bees in his mouth. That's dedication. So with Candyman, he starred in the various sequels. So you had Candyman Farewell to the Flesh, and off my head I can't remember the other ones. He also was in The Crow. He was in The Rock with Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery. He was also in Wishmaster. And then I'm going to go to the Final Destination films. Now, we all like a bit of Final Destination, and I'm sure you're like me. If I'm driving and I see a truck in front of me and it's got any form of beams or anything which basically could fly out and head towards me, I do not drive behind that vehicle. And I'm sure the majority of you are the same. So if you're a fan of the Final Destination films, you know that Tony Todd played William Bloodworth. And again, iconic character, very distinctive voice. You just knew. And I'm sure when you first see him in the first Final Destination, I'm sure you hear him before you see him, and straight away as soon as you hear the voice, you know that's Tony Todd. He was also in the Candyman remake from 2021. I won't lie, I weren't a particularly big fan of the film, but I'm glad that they brought him back. I'm glad that they respected the original and, you know, found a role for Tony Todd in that film. So I'm just going to move to sci-fi, and I think of certain franchises when I think of sci-fi. So I'm then going to move to TV, and I'm going to move to Star Trek. So Star Trek is a show which is immensely popular. It's been around for a long time. It's got a very low fan base, and I've got a lot of time for Star Trek. Between around 1990 and 1991, Tony Todd starred in Star Trek The Next Generation. Now, if you remember The Next Generation, it was brilliant. And some of the characters I remember straight away were iconic. So you had LaForge, you had Data, you had Captain Picard. And one of the characters who was immensely popular was Worf. Spoiler alert, if you're a Trekkie, there's no way you don't know this. So Worf had a younger brother, and his younger brother was called Kern. Now, Kern was played by Tony Todd, playing such an important role in The Next Generation, especially when it was linked to such a popular character, means that Tony Todd will forever be remembered by Trekkies. So in 1995-96, he starred in Deep Space Nine, and he starred as the adult Jake Sisko. And in 1998 in Star Trek Voyager, he starred as Alpha Hydrogen. Now, sticking on TV shows, one of my favourite TV series of all time, and it may even be my favourite, is 24. Now, Tony Todd was in 24 on more than one occasion as well. So he was in Series 3 and he was also in Series 7. And he's one of the only few characters that had different speaking roles in 24. Tony Todd was also in 24 Redemption. Other things I learned about Tony Todd was that he was considered for the role of Dormammu in Doctor Strange. But I think for me, I always remember Tony Todd as Candyman. I'm a big fan of horror films, and he is part of that list which I mentioned at the beginning. Totally iconic, and he will be sadly missed. I did make reference to gamers at the beginning of this video, so if you're a fan of the Spider-Man games or Spider-Man 2, which is a very good game, Tony Todd plays the voice of Venom in the game. Well guys, that was my short tribute to Tony Todd. It is sad that he is no longer with us. I will always remember him from the material that I mentioned earlier. Rest in peace to Tony Todd. And guys, if you like this content, please like this channel. Please subscribe. And if you could comment, I would be very interested to hear if you've got any comments you'd like to make. What other roles do you remember him from? Was there any more iconic than the ones that I've mentioned? Thanks guys, and I will see you on the next episode of The Crazy World We Die In. Take care.